with the author, Dr. Zhang, from the article, The Generalized Thurstonian Unfolding Model, GTUM, Advancing the Modeling of Forced Choice Data, published in the October 2024 issue of the Organizational Research Methods Journal. Dr. Zhang, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so for the beginning, for our interview today, we'll talk about the background story of the paper, as well as the author's motivation and the background story in the review process, and their further thoughts on how to take this research forward. So to start it off, can you give us a brief highlight of your article and how this article will help scholars in their research?
Sounds good. So thank you so much. So basically, this paper is about the development of a new item response theory model for a specific type of measurement data, that is forced choice measurement. So typically in our field, we are interested in a lot of constructs. So we assess them with Likert scales. Basically, each time we give them a single statement and ask them to see how much do you agree with this item. So this is what we'll call a single statement assessment or Likert rating scales. But Likert rating scales, a lot of us are familiar. There are many issues with Likert rating scales. For example, all kind of response bias and response styles, and particularly when we apply this Likert rating scales, for example, Likert rating scales or personality in a high-stake situation like personal selection, it is actually very easy for people to fake their responses. So that means in this case, the data we obtained from the Likert rating scales, its validity might be compromised. So that is the reason why I have been doing a lot of work related to forced choice measurement. So in forced choice measurement, instead of giving people one statement at a time, instead I will give you a block of statement at one time. A block contains at least 2 statements. There can be more. And then I will ask you to choose, relatively speaking, which one is more like you or which one is the less like you. Or I will just ask you to rank all the statements from the most like you to the least like you. And also, when developing forced choice measurement, I will make sure that all the statements within the same block, they are matched on social disability. That means they are equally good or equally bad or equally neutral. So in this way, it's really, really hard for people to choose, the best looking one, because in this way, and we assume that then in this case, they have to select based on their for example, true personality. So this is what forced choice scale looks like. But the problem is with forced choice data, it's very complicated to analyze such data. We cannot just use simple scoring, like just add up numbers or something. We need to really delve into the response process and then develop a corresponding scoring models to get the information we want from the data. So in our field, there are already several types of IRT models to deal with forced choice data. But in most cases, these IRT models, they are limited in one way or another. For example, there are some models that can only apply to pairs, basically a block size of 2. There are some other models that probably only applies to the rank data, or some other models only apply to a specific response model under certain assumptions. So basically that means if you use different forced choice scales, different types of forced choice scales, you might need to use different models for the scoring, which makes it really hard to compare across different types of scales. So basically the overall idea of this paper is to develop a model that can deal with all type of forced choice scales, regardless your block size, regardless of your assumption of how they respond to this model, or regardless, whether they are asked to rank the statements or not. So this is the ultimate goal of this project, to develop a model that can be applied to at least as many forced choice format as possible. So that's the basic idea of this. And then in this paper, of course, we developed the model and we present the formulas. And then we also run a bunch of multiple simulation studies to show that this model can indeed work. Its statistical property is good enough to be used. And then we also presented 2 empirical data sets to further support the utility of this new model in real data. So I think through this model deviation and also simulation and also empirical data, I think we have presented a pretty strong case for this new model. So I personally call it a GTUM. So I think it's a really interesting process.
Yes, it sounds like a very interesting paper. And as a young scholar, as I am with my limited experience, I know that I'm not familiar with the forced choice model. So hopefully that through this paper, you and your author can bring this type of model closer to more management and psychology scholars.
Yeah, I think I think actually you mentioned a really, really good point. It's like because to be honest, the force choice measurement of non-cognitive construct itself is a pretty small area. Not so many people are familiar with this type of assessment, even though I thought it's very, very promising. And one of the reasons is actually the scoring is very, very complicated. So the scoring methods, the models are not common, and also it's very complicated. So when I was writing this paper for organizational research methods, I paid a lot of attention to trying to make the introduction as accessible as possible. So actually, when I was writing the paper, my goal is like for someone who has never heard about force choice or has never dealt with force choice data, hopefully after reading my introduction, they should have a pretty working knowledge of what force choice measure is and also how the scoring works, at least in principle. So I think this is also a part I particularly like about organizational research methods. It is not only about presenting fancy methods, it is more about presenting useful methods and also make them very accessible so that more and more other non-quantitative oriented scholars can use the methods you develop. So that's really what I have been trying to do when writing this paper. So that's the reason why when I do this, we also have a R package. So that means it's not all other models you develop, probably you will only see the formulas. But we know that from seeing the formula to really apply this model, there is a long distance. So in order to further reduce the gap, so that's the reason why we also develop an R package so that literally we try to make sure that everyone who knows how to use R should be able to use this model.
Yes, and I think that is even beyond the paper, you and the author team seems to try to make this methods even more accessible to scholars by designing the package. And as a young scholar who love R, I'm very excited to dive in and get to know more about the GTUM model through your paper and also other relevant paper. So can you elaborate more on the motivation of this paper? What brings you to GTUM and why do you decide to write this paper in the first place?
Yeah, to be honest, the initial idea of this paper was it's literally starts from the conversation with my former advisor, Fritz Strasko. So when I was a graduate student, I worked with Fritz a lot on IRT models. But during that time, I did a lot of work related to what we call unfolding models. Basically in the measurement literature, there are two type of broad categories of assumptions about how people respond to measures of personality. There is a dominance assumption or an unfolding assumption. Basically, dominance assumption is implicitly adopted by most of the scoring methods we do. For example, you sum up things or you use traditional IRT models to do data analysis. They all fall under the category of dominance models. Basically, according to the dominance assumption, it's like so, for example, basically the dominance the response process assume that there is a monotonically increasing relationship between your latent trait level and also the probability of endorsing this item. So basically that means, for example, if you are more extroverted, you are more likely to endorse an extroversion item. So that's assumption for a lot of the models we use, even though because it's such a widely used assumption that actually we didn't talk about it, but that's the assumption we made. But actually, in the case of non-cognitive assessment, there has been another types of assumption about how people respond. That's called the unfolding response process. So according to this unfolding model, the only time we will be endorsing an item is when the description of the item matches your personality. For example, let's say if we have an item, my extroversion level is on average. So if I'm very introvert, I will say no to this item. If I'm very extroverted, I will also say no to this item. I will only say yes to this item when I'm really, extroverted on average. I'm not too extroverted or too introverted. Only in this case, I will say yes to this item. So basically, the unfolding model assumes that there is this kind of bell-shaped relationship between your latent trait levels and the probability of endorsing an item. So these are fundamentally different ones. And according to a lot of past studies, so we show that actually for non-cognitive assessments, this unfolding response process is actually more accurate description of how people respond to measures of non-cognitive items compared to the dominance assumption. So this is like how I get into the idea, how I get interested in the unfolding response process. And then But previously, all of my work are related to, just the single statements, you like your scales. But now, then, and also in our lab, and then later, I also did a lot of research with force choice measurement. But then I was thinking about probably I could combine this too. And then I was like, and it is true that in the one of another very influential professors in our field, Dr. Steve Stark, about 20 years ago, he developed another force choice model which already used the unfolding assumption. So it is called the multi-unidimensional pairwise preference model. It's called the MUMP model. This MUMP model is very, very useful. It is actually the first modern IRT model that can address some issues of the force choice measurement data. But this model is very useful, has been very inspiring, has actually kind of resurrected the entire field of force choice measurements. But this model is only the original model was only limited to force choice composing of pairs. Basically, I give you two statements per time, but it cannot be used to other conditions. So my thought was like, how about let's just combine them and also expand the original model at the same time, still taking into consideration of how people actually responded to measures of non-cognitive measures. And then the combination of unfolding response process and also trying to make the original model more flexible and also more encompassing, more inclusive so that we can deal with all types of force choice data. So basically that is how I initially developed this idea. And then because when I had a clear idea about what I want to do, I think it was 3 years ago. It is in the summer of 2021. And then during that time, I just spent like 2 months, coming up with the code and then I run a bunch of simulations. Seems like it's working. It was working pretty well. So I decided to write a paper out of it. So basically, that's how I developed this idea.
Yes, thank you for sharing kind of like the motivation of where you write this paper from. And I love how you evaluate the previous model and see where the gaps and how you can make this even more accessible, not just for your own research, but also to help other scholars be more familiar with the GTUM model as well. So can you share with us some background stories in the review process? What did you find interesting in the review process, or what surprised you in the review process?
To be honest, this is another aspect I really, really like about ORM. Is like actually the review process was very smooth. Of course, the reviewers give us a lot of constructive feedback, but I think all of this feedback, they are very constructive, very reasonable. I didn't see any, sometimes when you submit to journals, you will receive some comments that are not very constructive. But the good thing is about all the comments from ORM reviewers, very constructive, and also I had a very, very responsible and also fast action editor. So I think that's like the entire review process was very enjoyable, to be honest. And then in this process, I think one thing I want to mention is like, because as I told you, actually in this field, there are already multiple models actually developing. So I'm not the first one to propose an IRT model for choice data. So I really need to make a good case for why this model is necessary. So I spend a lot of time researching each existing model and trying to very carefully saying, what's their strength and also what's their potential limitation. But I think in this case, I initially, because sometimes when I was trying to make a case for my model, so sometimes I just didn't talk too much about a certain specific model because I want to make a case for my model. And then turns out one of the reviewer must be one of the authors of one of the models. And actually that reviewer was of course, very familiar with these models as well. And that reviewer urged me to talk more, to be more detail oriented in terms when I talk about previous models. So that's the reason why you can see that actually in my paper, I have a table listing all these previous models and these features. And this was an inspiration coming from one of the reviewers. I really appreciate this constructive feedback because indeed it make my introduction more educational to other people.
Yes, and it sounds like the review feedback is really critical and developmental
Yes.
to your paper as well. And that's also the sentiment that I have heard from other authors that submit to ORM journal. Um,
Yes.
so can you talk more about like what is your evaluation of the current state research surrounding force troy measurement and relevant to GTUM model? You can touch on how there are other models out there, but what do you see the state of this type of model being used in management and psychology?
I think this is a really, really great question because for me, it's like I have been working in this area for multiple years and I have published multiple papers on this topic. Based on my personal experience with the force choice measurement, actually, I can see that actually has great potential. But I think there is an issue in our field. That is like nowadays, a lot of people, when they talk about force choice measurement, they only think about in the context of personal selection because force choice measurement has been shown to be faking resistant. And it is indeed the reason why force choice measurement was proposed at the very first beginning. But to me, it's like I think if we only limit force choice measurement to personal selection, actually, I think it kind of, it's kind of we are underutilizing force choice measurement because to me, I think force choice measurement can also have a lot of advantages, even in general research context. Nowadays when we submit a paper, a lot of reviewers will criticize saying that, oh, your outcome measures and also your predictive measures are measured both by Likert scales. So there will be common method bias or kind of, common method bias is a really big concern for a lot of research. But I think for me, it's like, okay, if common method bias is such a big concern, so why not just use force choice measurement to measure one of the construct? And then in this case, we can avoid a lot of these issues associated with common method bias. For example, if I'm interested in the relationship between personality and job satisfaction, and of course, traditionally, we measure both personality and job satisfaction using Likert scales. So in this case, the correlation we obtained indeed can be inflated just because of common method bias. But if we can just use force choice measurement to measure personality and then use self-report to measure job satisfaction. So in this case, we will be able to largely, at least reduce the impact of common method bias. So I think this is another area that's like another scenario that can be applied. But nowadays, it seems like in general, most researchers in our field haven't really thought about this. So every time when people think about force choice measurement, they just think about faking. I just think about personal selection. But to me, I think it's way beyond personal selection. So here is also a reason why my lab currently is trying to do more work in a non-selection scenario. We are trying to broaden the scope of the application scenario so that in the future, more and more researchers were starting to appreciate the value of force choice measurement in other contexts other than personal selection. So this is what I've been trying to do. So hopefully in the future, there will be more people to use this this format of measurements. And so hopefully the paper we developed and also especially the R package we developed can further facilitate this process. So this is one observation. And another observation nowadays is like, it's kind of, I think another observation is nowadays, I assume one of the reasons why people are not using force choice measurement that frequently is because it's really hard. It's hard to construct a force choice measure, and also it's hard to score the data. So, and then it can be quite technical. It requires a lot of expertise. So I think another thing probably in our field we should do, actually as a force choice researchers, we should do is to do more empirical studies, telling people how to design good force choice measurement, how to make the scoring process even more accessible, easier. So in this way, more and more people will use this. So that's my feeling. But but in general, based on my reading of this entire area, I feel like we have a lot of method study, including developing new models, proposing, different estimation methods, a lot of simulation work. Personally, I think we probably already have had enough working models so that it can be applied. But I think in our field, we probably should do more empirical work to show the true utility of force choice measurement in empirical research. I think we need more work on this side. Of course, we still need to do methodological work, but at the same time, I think our empirical work should also follow up so that we can really show people in real data it did had incremental values compared to Likert scales. So I think that's my observation of this entire field.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And you also elaborate on what seems like to be the challenge of why force choice measurements are not as common as Likert scale. So besides the kind of like unfamiliarity, what are all the kind of challenges that you think that prevents people from using this type of model? Because what I think as a young scholar myself, when I choose measurements for construct that we measure, it seems like it's the Likert scale. So do you think with the force-story measurement, we will have to create like a different type of measurement with different type of questions to measure those kind of construct?
Yeah, so basically, I think one of the main reasons is because for most of the constructs we study in our organizational field or in psychology, it's like all the existing measures, almost all the existing measures, they are already in Likert scale format. And it's much easier to use an existing measure than you compared to if you have to develop a new measure of yourself. So I think that's one of the major reason. And then I think a second reason is because I think it's on us for sure, researchers. We didn't really do a really good job promoting our work. So I think a lot of people, especially if their work is not related to measurement, probably they have never heard about this format. So that I think that's we did. I don't think we didn't do a good job of publicizing this alternative format, especially what's going to be the advantage of using this format. So again, that's the reason why nowadays, every time when I was writing a paper related to force choice measurement, I really spent a lot of time and also devoted a lot of space talking about the potential advantages of using force choice format in regular research settings. So I think as force researchers, we definitely should do more to let more people know about this and also make them accessible. I think this is a second reason. And then the third reason is indeed it is challenging to develop forcial skills. Because if you want to develop a good forcial skills, the first step is actually to develop good items. And then that's already a lot of trouble. You know that from how we develop Likert skills. So that's already a lot of trouble. But actually, that's just the first step for
Yeah.
developing forcial measurement. So after we have done, have a bunch of good statements or items, and then we need to think about ways to put them together in blocks. And then there are many rules we need to follow. And also some rules sometimes can be they can be contradictory. So how can we strike a balance? For example, if I give you 20 items, I want you to put them into 5 blocks. That means each block has 4 statements. You can imagine how many combinations there will be, right? So
Yes.
what's gonna be the good combination? What is gonna be an ineffective combination? So this is really, really, really hard. And to a lot of people, that's like and to be honest, nowadays there is no good solutions. So nowadays it's like we have to strike a balance across multiple considerations, and then that's gonna make the development of force choice measurement really, really hard. And then this is the reason why in our lab, we actually developed another R package that is called AutoFC for us to basically at least to do the pairing process automatically according to some predefined criterion. So at least we can ask the algorithm to search for the best combination that meets our criterion. So this is what we have been doing. So hopefully in the future, more and more people will know about this package and then starting to use this package to develop their own measure for example, of personality. So I think this is a third reason. And the last reason is like, it is true that sometimes for some constructs, probably force choice format is not gonna work. So I think this is also something we need to pay attention to. Force choice format is not a cure for all. It's not gonna work for everything. It works really well for things like personality, vocational interest, but probably for something like emotion or for something like counterproductive work behaviors, probably it's really, really hard. And in that case, I don't think it's gonna work that well for that type of constructs. So I think this is also something, probably another reason why it's not widely used because it is indeed not very applicable to certain type of constructs we often study.
Yes, and I love that you kind of like point out how force-story measure is limited in these personnel selection, but so that is should be expanded. But at the same time, there are some specific construct that this type of measurement might not be applicable. So
Mhm.
it's the issue of how we know which construct can be measured by force-story measurement. And now we are on this conversation. What are some future directions for the research around force choice measurement. What are your thoughts on where scholars can move this field forward, this research?
I think if we really want to move this area forward and also having more researchers to start to at least thinking about using this alternative formats of measurement, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to show people that force choice measurement is also beneficial in non-selection context. So in this way, there are only a very small subset of people who are personal selection researchers, but nowadays they are the major consumers of force choice measurements. But I think if we really want to expand this field, we need to show a much bigger subset of researchers who are not doing personal selection, who are doing general research, and we show them with evidence that force choice measurement can still be useful. As I mentioned, if you are concerned about response bias or response styles, and then force choice measurement is a really, really good solution. And also sometimes if you're concerned about social disability responding, and then force choice measurement can also be another very good solution. And another scenario is like in cross-cultural studies. For example, if I want to study personality difference between Western culture and Eastern culture, and then if you use Likert scale, there is a big problem because there has been a lot of evidence showing that people in the Western culture are more likely to use the extreme response options compared to people in the Asian cultures are more likely to use the non-extreme response options, the response options in the middle, and then regardless the item content. So in this case, actually the scores we obtained probably are not directly comparable just because the difference is not caused by our actual difference. It is caused by how we use the response anchors. So this is gonna create bias. But if we use force choice measurement, so we can actually get rid of these issues at all. And then in this case, probably the results from force choice measurement are much more comparable across different cultures or across different groups. So anyway, so in this field, if we really want to move forward, I think we really need to do some strong work to show people that force choice measurement is also beneficial in non-selection context. I think this, of course, it cannot be done by a single lab. It requires a lot of collective efforts, but I do think this is something we can do. So this is the first one. And I think the second thing we want to do is, as I have talked about this before, is basically we need to do more empirical work, telling people what's the best practice to develop a good force choice scales, and also what we need to pay attention to. For example, in Likert scales, there are so many classic citations we can use about how to write items, how to do item selection, and also what's the influence of the number of response options. Should we use 2 response options, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? There are so many papers on this topic, so that when we want to develop Likert scales, we have many citations we can go to look for the best practice. But in the area of force choice measurement, there is almost no such guideline papers because we don't have enough empirical studies examining these factors. For example, block size, we can put 2 statements together. We can put 3 statements together. We can also put 5 statements together. So in terms of block size, which one is better? Because the good thing, there is a balance. The bigger the block size, the harder it is to make a choice from them. And then the smaller the block size is the easier it is to make a choice. But at the same time, a larger block size contains more information. So there is a trade-off between cognitive load and also information. So what's the optimum, what's the best balance? So we don't know. We just need more researchers on this area. So generally speaking, I think the second direction we should go is to do more empirical studies, trying to show people what's the best practice. So especially it's really important that these recommendations should be based on empirical evidence, based on data, instead of based on our opinions. So I think this is also the second area we should go for. And also particularly if we can do something also showing that if we use force choice measurement for cross-cultural studies, and we can show that if the results from cross-cultural studies are more consistent with theories, I think that's going to be, such a study is going to be a big contribution to this field. And it's definitely going to, popularize this force choice format.
Yes, and you have talked about the application of force choice measurement in cross-cultural study and also in personnel selection. Through the work of your lab, what are other areas that force choice measurement can be applied?
So actually, I think nowadays there are other areas like, for example, in clinical settings, I think can also be used because unlike in a personal section, everyone is trying to, present a better version of themselves to make themselves look better because you want to get the job. But actually, in the clinical diagnostic sessions, sometimes people might fake bad. For example, they might fake, for example, psychological disorders in order to, for example, get away from some legal issues or get some over-the-counter prescriptions, whatever.
Mm,
So faking bad in the clinical setting is actually also a very serious issue, and they have developed multiple ways trying to address these issues. But based on my limited reading in that area, I don't think they are that effective. So probably force choice measurement can also be a pretty effective cure to deal with this type of faking bad phenomenon. So I think that's one area probably probably force choice measurement can go. And also I think another very important area to go is like to study how force choice measurements apply across different populations. So for example, currently in my lab, we are working on a study to see whether force choice format is equally applicable or functions equivalently across, different race and also across gender. So actually, according to our studies, this is an ongoing project. So the results are preliminary. Based
mm.
on based on our preliminary results, we find that there is almost, it almost functionally functioned, equally across, males and also females. But when we look at the racial difference, actually we find some really really interesting patterns. For example, we have a group of white participants and also a group of matched black participants. So basically, we find out that black participants actually liked force choice more than Likert scales. So basically, they have more positive respondent reactions. And also with force choice measurement, we find that black participants, they are actually they have higher conscientiousness score, higher emotional stability score, higher agreeableness score, and also higher extroversion score, and also higher openness score. That means actually they have higher scores on these positive attributes, which is really, really good in the selection context, because that means if we use force choice measurement for selection, we can actually somehow reverse the adverse impact we often see in the selection scenario. But on the other hand, if we only use Likert scales, we can see that actually the racial difference in personality revealed by Likert scales is more limited. It's much smaller. So that means somehow probably that is because Likert scales is contaminated by response bias or response styles. So actually, it restricted our participants to truly reflect their personality. But with force choice measurement, because we do not have this type of response bias or response style, so now it allows Black participants to better show their desirable qualities. So I think personally, I find these results to be very exciting and also to be very promising. And then so I think that's one area we can also further explore to show whether it at least functions equivalently especially in underrepresented groups. So that is the area that has almost not been touched upon in this area.
Yes,
Yep.
that sounds very exciting. And the results, the preliminary result from your lab of that study sounds very interesting, and also reveals that the traditional measures that we've been using, the Likert scale, might have issues that forced choice measurement can be the remedy.
Yes. So well, again, that's based on preliminary studies.
Yes.
We definitely need more data and also to make sure that we have more solid evidence. At least to me, I think these initial results are promising. So we're definitely gonna do more work to explore further along this direction. So hopefully in the future we can publish the results and then to encourage more people to use this format.
And as you also mentioned, that's encouraged more scholars to provide more empirical study and empirical evidence to develop this methods.
Yes.
So, do you have any thoughts that you want to share to the audience that we have not covered today?
Uh, Let me see. I have so many things I want to share. Let me see which one I want to share first. Um, so basically, I want to share about probably talking about some doing research methods in our area in general. Is that a topic that is okay for this conversation?
Yes, and I think if you want to elaborate on like advice for scholars that who might be interested in doing research in forced choice measurement, what are some advice that you will give them?
Yeah, basically, I think the advice I will give is I just gave this advice to my new students, just last week. So basically, I think the first very important advice is like we need to uh you need to read a lot. Literally, that's really, really important because this area, again, is not very big. So you cannot even find a textbook talking about how to do this because a lot of knowledge, they are scattered across different papers. So that means there is no like a compiled knowledge. So you literally need to read a lot. I actually did a literature search a few years ago. So probably up to now, in this entire world about forces measurement, there are about 300 papers. That's the total amount of papers in this area across multiple decades. So basically, I think probably the first thing is to familiarize yourself at least with these classic papers. To read is really, really important and understanding what's going on behind these formulas and also behind these empirical studies. So I think keep reading is very important. And also at the same time, and also don't be too hard on yourself because it is true that a lot of these papers, they are very technical, they're very hard to read, and it's kind of impossible to understand everything when you just read it for once. I
Yeah.
remember when I was a graduate student, there are several class papers I probably have read like for 12 times or 20 times before I really, really fully understand what they are doing. And then, so I think when you are working, especially if you are a junior scholar in this field, please don't be too hard on yourself. Just, that's very, very normal. You do need to spend a lot of time trying to figure this out because a lot of times in our area, if you read an empirical study, it's relatively easy to get the findings, to know what they are doing, and also to know how they did it. But for methodological research, it does take more time, especially when you are trying to still build up your necessary skills to do methodological research. It does take like probably it's going to take 2 or 3 years before you can develop your own models or your own research ideas. So just be patient and also don't be too hard on yourself. And also at the same time, reach out for help. I think that's super, super important because sometimes if you just try to figure out everything by yourself, it might take very, very long. But actually, if you talk to someone with more experience, you can probably save a lot of time. So I think reach out for help is also very, very, very important. And also the last thing is like so a lot of times it is true that our models probably because models are just models, they do not have a substantial story behind this. So it is unlikely to be covered by newspapers. So it's unlikely, but I think we need to realize the models, even though they probably are not as cool or as fancy as empirical studies, but they are indeed important. So they are the backbone of all the empirical evidence. So I think we should really, really appreciate the importance of doing methods and doing models because these are the underlying backbones that support all the fancy stories we read about, all the important progress we made in this field. So I think be appreciative of the importance of methods. I think that's also an advice I want to give to all junior students.
Yes, thank you very much for advice. And I think it's not just applicable to doing work in force choice measurement, but also for us junior scholar when we engage in scholastic research.
Mhm.
Yes. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience regarding, research and research methods in general or force choice measurement model?
Mm, I think probably talking about, just doing research in our area. I think nowadays it is indeed getting, harder and harder. The publication bar is getting harder and harder, and we all know that in our area, publication is really important, especially if you want to go for an academic career. So I think in this process, I would advise, there are several advice I think that works for me. So it does not guarantee that it's gonna work for everyone, but just some advice I think that works for me is like, uh, keep reading. Again, keep reading. I think reading is really, really important. Just reading, of course, focusing on your own area, but also at the same time reading beyond your own interest. Because sometimes you won't realize how important some papers you read for fun will be to your future research. So I would recommend you read your area and also read beyond your area. So I think that's really, really important. And the second thing is like start your research program as soon as you can because don't wait until you feel confident about doing the research. So
Hmm.
because Probably it's really for some, because for me, for example, for me, I never feel 100% confident about doing things, but I just cannot wait. So we need to start. And also for doing research is like, I think the best way to learn is just by doing, by making mistakes. So I think just get, if you want to go for a academic career, I would recommend, junior students to start research program as soon as you can. So don't wait until I know all the literature, until I know all the methods. Don't wait. Just like get started and then learning by doing. I think that's a very, very useful way of, really becoming a academic scholar.
Yes, and I think I feel like that's also applicable to the unfamiliar models such as forced choice measurement as well. Of yes, there will be uncertainty, there will be gray areas, there will be unknown knowledge that we are not familiar with, but getting started is what is important.
Yes.
And yes, thank you very much, both, for your time. And also, I want to appreciate your team work in bringing forced choice measurement more familiar, more common to the management and psychology scholars. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.